So, oh, whoops.
Okay.
You're live,
Welcome,
Senator.
everybody. Welcome, committee members and members of the public. We're going to get started. The first item on the agenda. I got dogs barking in the background, sorry. Has to do with the housing bill and incorporating parts of S-270 into the bill, dealing with backlog or speeding up potentially court procedures. They were presented by Senator Brock to us, and we're going to do a quick review of that. Ellen, could you just quickly walk us through those two sections that involve the environmental court? Senator Clarkson, yes.
Randy will be with us momentarily.
Okay. Well, let's get started with Ellen. If you could just.
Did you want me to put the language on the screen or do you have it?
No, I think we pretty much have this one. Okay.
Okay.
It's, what section is it in? It is.
It's sections 18 and 19
Oh, right.
4.1. So it's really at the end of the bill, page 40 on draft 4.1. And as Senator Sorokin just mentioned, these two sections came out of S-270 that were sponsored by Senator Brock. The first section, section 18, amends 10 VSA section 6089, which is the appeal section of Act 250. It adds language that directs the Environmental Division of the Superior Court to act on an Act 250 appeal within 30 days of receiving the petition for appeal, and then to issue a final decision on that appeal within 120 days. If it relates to a project covered under 6001 3A4, which is related to housing projects. And then finally, if the Environmental Division fails to meet the timelines in this section, the Natural Resources Board is to refund the applicant's Act 250 application fees that were paid. And then section 19 is an appropriation of $300,000 from ARPA funds to the Environmental Division of the Superior Court to hire one limited service environmental judge and one limited service law clerk.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's those two sections.
Okay. I guess I'm just one quick question for you in terms of the refund. I mean, I've heard mention that could vary wildly into six figures at times. Is that correct?
Sure. So Act 250 fees are based on they are a percentage of the construction costs of a project. So the larger the construction involved, the higher the fee. And so, you know, projects that cost in the tens of millions of dollars can have a project fee of upwards of $100,000.
And who is that paid to?
It goes to the Natural Resources Board, the Act 250 agency. The agency currently is largely self-funded by those fees, although in recent years they've been running a deficit and have been in need of additional general fund appropriations. But the fees directly fund the work of the agency.
Right.
As they should. We sort of have an odd situation here where the delay may be in the court and their shortage of personnel or whatever their priorities are, and yet the Natural Resources Board, which has done significant work up to that point, gives back the fees.
Yes, that is a very good point.
Okay. All right. Okay, we're gonna hear from Judge Zone at this point of his thoughts on these two sections. This is the first time, Judge, that we've really talked about this. I think maybe Senator Brock tried to defend this in a presentation to us, but we haven't drawn any conclusions or gotten into any depth on this, but I'm sure there's some hidden nuggets in here. So let's welcome you. Welcome this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and take it away.
So, Tom Zone, Chief Superior Judge, it's a pleasure to be here this morning. When you look at the two separate sections, I'll first start with Section 18. Section 18 sets forth some timelines for actions to be taken by the court. It further sets forth some timelines for decisions to be rendered by the court. Let's be very clear. All divisions of our courts want to get decisions done in a timely manner, recognizing the importance of getting them done in a timely fashion. To the extent that it is necessary to get something done on an expedited basis, our environmental division, like other divisions, will certainly do their best to conform to that and meet any type of guidelines or deadlines that might be imposed. We are seeing these types of pressures on all of our dockets, whether it's in the criminal docket for individuals who might be incarcerated or the timeliness of hearings, in our juvenile dockets, our civil dockets. The pandemic has caused a significant backlog in many of our dockets, such that we do have docket pressures. I've spoken with Judge Durkin, who's the presiding judge of the Environmental Division, and he recognizes the importance of looking at this type of statutory enactment from the view of we need to get things done as fast as we can. And he said that, yes, the division certainly would go in that direction to get things done in a timely manner. It's difficult to understand exactly how many cases would be affected because of the uncertainty that we have with this new statute and things coming up. And he considered the existing Act 250 statutes and how we look there at going forward, and concluded that he thinks that we can take care of this. We can address things in a fashion that is timely. I am not going to offer a legal determination on constitutionality at this time. I want to be very clear about that. I would simply note that there are a number of legislative attempts in other jurisdictions that have at times tried to place restrictions on the timeliness of judicial decisions. And some Supreme Courts across the country have found that that is a violation of the separation of powers because it infringes upon the prerogative of the judicial branch as far as the timeliness of decisions. And so I do see that this statute, Section 18, does contain provisions that would potentially give rise to concerns, I would say, about separation of powers issues that should be considered in going forward with this. I would also note that a statute that's built upon the executive branch of government and its funding, dependent upon what the judicial system does during its specific timelines, I suggest that that's problematic because the branch that is going to be benefited or harmed by the financial side has no ability to address things. And again, while the judiciary wants to address it in a timely manner, and we'll do everything we can to address any appeals in a timely and appropriate manner, putting deadlines on and timelines on, especially as we've seen over the pandemic, can cause problems because we are getting pressures on all of our dockets. And that leads to Section 19. A natural thought is, well, let's add more judges. Let me be very clear. If the legislature wants to add additional permanent judges that are fully funded going forward from now on, that can be assigned to address the specific dockets and backlogs that we determine on an ongoing basis are appropriate, yes, absolutely, we support that. We need more judges, more law clerks. It would be very helpful to us to address the backlogs. Section 19 does not go in that direction. Section 19 would put in a one-year limited service judge. The judiciary cannot support having a judge for 1 year. Number one, and I would point out our most recent experience with 3 new Superior Court judges. The vacancies were noticed in July of 2021 after the interview process, nominations, and training. They finally were able to take the bench on February 1st. They were sworn in on January 3rd of 2022. In other words, we're looking at 6 to 7 months lead time just to get someone up to speed. And by the time you would get a new judge on, they'd actually be getting ready to go back into whatever other practice they have. And practically speaking, it's just not feasible. And also, the new appeals that would be coming up under the statute probably wouldn't even reach this new judge by the time he or she would be leaving their position, because it would take time for them to go through the process. And so while we certainly would take additional judicial resources such as new judges, a 1-year limited service judge that's funded through federal funds, that's not the answer to addressing backlogs. Permanent full-time judges that are put into our judicial system to be able to address the specific backlogs we have, whether it's in the criminal, family, civil, probate, or environmental divisions, that would be helpful. And we would certainly support that, but we cannot support a 1-year limited service position.
Do you have concerns that you're directed, the temporary nature of it? I hear you loud and clear about that, but how about the substantive area? I mean, is it unusual to be told to hire a new judge and to direct those resources to a specific docket? And is this the most meaty docket in your opinion? I've heard that you do have requests in for added resources, but you haven't asked for it in this particular area.
Well, that's correct. As far as the first question, being directed to hire judges, from my knowledge, and I have been doing my chief superior job for all of several months since November 1st. So it's limited as chief superior judge. I've been on the bench 15 years. I'm aside from the specific positions that were created for environmental judges years ago, I'm unaware of any type of legislative action that has said, here are judges and they're going to go to a specific docket. When we get superior court judges, they're sworn in as superior court judges, and they are general jurisdiction judges who will appear in all dockets. As far as the question of backlogs, my understanding is that the environmental division, from speaking with presiding Judge Durkin, they are basically on top of the backlogs, if you will. They actually, before the pandemic, were doing, given the statewide nature of the docket, they were doing a lot of hearings and other matters remotely already. So they transitioned very well into the remote docket, which enabled them to stay on top of matters in a way that some of our other dockets could not. For instance, the criminal docket, when you weren't able to have people come into the courts at different times, or restrictions there. The same with family and juvenile cases. We had a lot of backlogs building there. Those are the areas right now that we would need additional judicial resources for. We have trials we need to have for individuals who are in custody and others who have been out on conditions of release. We have juvenile cases where children need the permanency of the juvenile cases going forward, and we would need to put those resources in that way. We have matters in the civil division for landlord-tenant that are now coming in ways that we need to address those backlogs. So there are significant areas that we would need to address that would come before the environmental division if we were going to add additional resources and assign them.
Senator Clarkson.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate the separation of powers. The way the legislature weighs in at the moment on persistent, timely issues often is through judicial retention. And when I served on judicial retention, we actually had to deal with a timeliness issue with a judge. And so that is sort of traditionally the way that we have had our say on the timeliness issue. And I think, and that is obviously not invading separation of powers, because we've set that up and it seems to have worked for decades. So would you agree, Tom, that that's sort of one of the ways we have tended to deal with that in the past?
Absolutely. Judges have ethical responsibilities to render decisions in a timely manner. And in fact, not only is it something that the retention can look at if judges have issues with timeliness of decisions, but in my role as chief superior judge, one of the things that I do is I get what's called the under advisement lists. And we do have expectations for judges of getting decisions done in a timely manner. If decisions are not done in a timely manner, I will interact with the judge to determine why, when it can be expected, and if there's any steps that can be taken to make sure we get the decisions. And certainly, no two cases are the same, no two judges are the same, but we do have provisions in place to address that. And ultimately, it's a performance issue if judges are not getting their decisions done in a timely manner that the legislature has oversight on as far as addressing retention.
So I'm going to make a suggestion because we're running out of time. And I know, Senator Brock, this is your proposal. Would you be willing to have a one-on-one conversation with Judge Zone so he doesn't have to repeat all the things he said early on these two sections?
I apologize for being late joining in. What started as a 1-minute phone call ended with a technical problem that would not allow me to get onto Zoom until just a moment ago, but I'd be happy to talk separately with Judge Zone. I just expressed just the concern in terms of, I understand the separation of powers issue, absolutely. And I understand some of the issues facing the judiciary vis-a-vis the legislature. I think, though, that there is a very strong concern that I hear among many of my colleagues is that waiting 6 years to deal with a problem is a bit long. And there is a perception that there is a problem with regard to the timeliness of decisions in appeals on these cases. And I think that's something that, again, we can talk about separately, and I'm happy to chat with you.
Yeah. And Senator Brock, there's no need to apologize. You're the most prompt member of our committee. So when you don't show up on time, I know there's a good reason. So, so thank you very much. Judge Zone, that was very crystal clear and very helpful and very timely. And we'll be in touch if we go further with this. Okay.
Thank you. And can I just ask, Senator Brock, did you want to reach out to me? And
sure, I will. Absolutely.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you all for your attention. Have a safe day and take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Senator. Take care. Bye-bye.
We're going to move on to Gus Seelig and Jen Holler as our combined tag team witnesses. We really haven't, I know a lot of us have been talking to them. They're critical piece of the housing puzzle in Vermont, but I think it would be useful to get their thoughts on the bill overall, and especially those sections of the bill that they would be intimately involved with. I also asked them to first give us an overview of the housing picture in general from last year, what they've done with their monies that were appropriated and what's being proposed for them, other significant resources and what is expected with that money. There's, we're talking about close to or over $100 million just going forward in FY 22 and 23. So we're dealing with we have an omnibus bill and we're dealing with a lot of things, but there's a lot of money out there for other housing that's not in this bill. So I think we need to have that overview as well. So I'm going to just open it up to you, Gus and Jen, however you would like to proceed. I think you know what we're after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Gus Seelig, Director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And with me is our Policy Director, Jen Holler, who's been following your work very closely on the Omnibus Housing Bill. I'm going to start with a brief overview and report as the chair just requested, and Jen's going to share screen and drive a few slides to respond to the inquiry about what we've been doing with the funds that have been appropriated and what the budget looks like. And then I'll make some very brief comments on the bill. And this first drawing is housing in West Burke. The costs went up, and we approved it a few years ago and provided some supplemental help so that this project will get under construction this summer and add 8 new homes. These numbers show you what was done with FY22 ARPA funding and state funding that was appropriated to us. So you'll see that the largest share of it is for rental housing, with about half for people experiencing homelessness. But we're also doing home ownership, including work with Habitat for Humanity. We're adding shelter capacity. With the Champlain Housing Trust, we've just launched a repair program, rehab program for farm worker housing. We are involved, as the bill is, and have been for many years, with mobile home parks, and this year added infrastructure improvements for 427 mobile homes in 4 different communities. And then finally, we've provided $2 million to the Housing Finance Agency so they could develop a risk pool for developers who want to create more entry-level housing. Let's go on to the next slide.
Could you just talk about that
Yeah.
last one for a second?
Yeah, because that
Yeah.
that has impact on other things, as you know, that we're talking about, the missing middle piece.
VHFA requested $2 million for a risk pool. And I think this is because developers, and I'm most aware of it since the financial meltdown with condo development, has really come to a stop in Vermont. And that's because the finance world, the banks, won't lend on projects unless you have 50% pre-sales, which has been not difficult in some markets, but difficult in Vermont. So the idea that VHFA put forward to us is that they would provide developers with a risk pool for 15% of a development. And we said, okay, that's a good idea. Let's give that a try. It would they'd provide the risk pool, the guarantee, or the deposit, whatever the right vehicle was for specific development. Assuming the development gets built out as planned, the dollars get returned and then recycled to help another developer move on. So that's the general idea of the development risk pool.
It sounds like, as Senator Clarkson says, there's some similarity to the missing middle proposal that we're talking about. We'll talk some more. I just was not aware of that.
Yes, it's definitely a part of what VHFA wants to build, and that was the piece that we felt was most appropriate for us to provide some support for.
Okay.
So let's move on to the next slide, Jen. These are a few examples of ARPA-funded housing, so we are not just doing shelters at all. I wanted to make note of 2 things in this slide. One is Bright Look Apartments in St. Johnsbury, and this is in contrast to what's happening with a property in Winooski. This owner was ready to sell, local fellow, but he knew that if he sold, just put it on the market, that rents would go up $200 to $400 a month, and the many elderly residents would be displaced. So he went to Rural Edge, said, I just want to get a fair market deal done. They got some help from us. This is what we call naturally occurring affordable housing, and nobody's being displaced and rents are staying stable. And it really just speaks to the value of permanent affordability as a state policy and not displacing people from their communities. Last year, when we were in front of you, we talked about the opportunity to continue to buy hotels. Champlain Housing Trust has been a national leader in this, and Vermont has been a national leader. We've recently closed on this property in Williston, and while renovations will get underway later in the year to convert it to 72 apartments, right now it is welcoming some of the Afghan refugees who've come to Vermont. Let's move on to the next slide. I just want to make clear that we have been involved for many years in permanently affordable home ownership. Again, CHT is involved in this building, and the city of Winooski's provided the land for it in downtown at the O'Brien Center. It's under construction now, and Michael may be able to answer your questions about how the marketing is going, but it's going great, and it'll provide 20 permanently affordable homes. We also have under construction across from the middle and high school in Woodstock, 4-unit condominium home ownership. We've worked with Habitat over many years and built 157 homes across the state with them now. That Bennington chapter has been particularly active, and this woman, her mom, and her son are one of the owners in a 20-unit subdivision that Habitat has developed in Manchester. And all of this comes with permanent affordability, so that we've funded about 1,200 of these homes around the state, and they've now been home to more than 1,800, probably close to 1,900 different families because of the sharing of appreciation that goes on. Let's move on. You gave us a lot of CRF funding. That's added a shelter in Brattleboro, modular homes in a number of locations around the state in mobile home parks, in this case, net zero modular home in Bradford. And we worked with a turnkey development, private developer who had a development permitted in Stowe and has sold it to the Lamoille Housing Partnership, and that is opening this month. I'm proud to say of that $33 million in CARES Act funding that you gave us that had a really tight timeline, we returned a grand total of $86 to the state treasury. So we were able to get the money out the door because of our many great partners who worked really hard under a very difficult time frame. Let's move on. You have in the bill a big section on mobile home parks. This has been part of our work historically. We're in support of it. We've engaged with about 46 or 47 mobile home park communities around the state with more than 2,500 homes in them. And this year we worked on these homes in Colchester, along with St. George and a couple over in Addison County. Let's keep moving. We have not had in the headlines the opioid epidemic because of the coronavirus. But we actually had an increase in federal funding because our death rate went up this year. And we have worked on 3 recovery residences around the state, in Barry, in Bennington, and in Essex. And the Essex project is another effort by the Champlain Housing Trust to meet the wide array of need in their community. Let's keep going. This chart just shows you we are being asked regularly when is housing coming online and how much of it is for the homeless. And every month that our board meets, and our next meetings will be in May and June, we'll add to the numbers for fiscal year that will get done in December, by December of 23. But overall, and this is not all of our work, this is our rental work that includes housing for the homeless. It does not include our mobile home park work or our home ownership work, but we're over 1,100 homes in a 3-year period that we'll add to, with about 45% of those homes focused on households who've experienced homelessness. Let's keep going. So these are the numbers that you asked for, Mr. Chairman. $92 million has been committed. $52 million is available. We're about to get a new round of applications in. The pipeline, as we measure it, is about $72 million long. Every time the legislature has added funding, we've had added interest in those funds. So you basically have been spurring developers to come forward and give us their thoughts and ideas. So there is a lot of demand for these dollars. Let's go to the next slide. And this just is going to close it out. You asked to be brief on the slides. So the Budget Adjustment Act has $55 million more to come to us, and I think that's been signed off on now. The governor's proposal for next year is a base funding for VHCB of $15 million and another $50 million from ARPA. And we can take the slides down now, and I'm happy to answer any questions about where we stand with getting dollars out the door and getting housing built, if that's appropriate. If not, I'll just move on and make a few comments about the bill.
Senator Clarkson. You're muted, and your theatrics are being lost because you're muted.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you, Gus. That was great. I feel like I've sort of had a tour of the state all more, it's like, wow, it's so exciting to see all the work that's happening. I guess my question for you is that pipeline of 72 million that's in the pipeline, is the expectation that 72 million will produce 1,459 new units? Is that Is that the expectation?
My caution for you, and you know, my style is always to like try to underpromise, is that sometimes what people tell us is a pipeline turns out to be a pipe dream. And so until we actually get each proposal and underwrite it and evaluate it on a whole bunch of criteria, I can't tell you that every piece of it is going to happen. We are also not the only funders, so we have to work at what are the expectations that is in each proposal for who else is going to fund. Can they get their award from the Federal Home Loan Bank? Is their award of tax credits one that's going to make sense? But in general, we are hopeful about that. But with those caveats, that's the goal, is that with our participation and their ability to borrow funds and leverage funds, that's what would happen.
Okay, that's the goal. I just wanted to make sure those two were, that was the equation. And so I think what we're also wanting to clarify is what money is going directly to you that we are not having to appropriate. You know, that you're going straight to appropriations for. And I think this final slide is what is that, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so and if we were to fund VHCB fully, what would that amount be?
There would be, if we were to get transfer tax revenue as is called for in statute,
Right.
Our transfer tax revenue would go up by about $20 million.
So it would be an additional 5 million to this 15 million base?
Additional 20 million to that $15 million base, close to that.
Thank you. That helps.
The transfer tax is way up, and there are two things going on. One is, I'm sure you've all heard the stories of people buying houses without seeing them or inspecting them, all cash buyers, and especially in resort communities. But as we look at the data, a town like Ferrisburg has seen the entry-level cost of housing almost double. And so the cost of entry into the housing market has gone up in communities like Ferrisburg and Barry and Williamstown, and communities where it wasn't all that expensive. The entry point into the housing market has gone up, along with people with lots of money being able to buy at incredible prices in resort communities and other places around Vermont.
Yes, sadly, already noted for several years here, but it's just gotten worse.
So you have, Gus, you have your board, and you have a lot of discretion as to how to use the money that's appropriated, whether it be rental or home ownership or mobile homes or Habitat for Humanity. You look at on a project by project, and I guess try and gauge where you get the most bang for your buck. Is that sort of an accurate statement?
Yeah, and we also try to listen to you as a committee of jurisdiction and listen to the appropriators. But, you know, as we walked through the process last year, there was a lot of interest in the ag community and in the ag community to do something about farm labor housing, and so we targeted some money for that. We had an RFP. CHT gave us the best proposal, and they're in partnership with UVM Extension, and we're beginning that program now. We have not spent enough, in my opinion, over many years on home ownership, but that's in part because the appropriators have asked us to really focus on the very lowest income citizens and the working folks who we now call essential workers who don't make a lot of money. And, so the biggest part of our work has always been in rental housing. There's a clear need, and we actually facilitated a report from John Ryan 2 years ago that I think is the basis of a number of recommendations in your bill. And we brought together a number of stakeholders to focus on the needs in mobile home communities, the need for dollars to get out abandoned homes, to put in new foundations, to get ready for more modern homes. We've been very supportive of the tax credit, but there's also just pressure in that market, as there is in many markets. As I said a moment ago, we've done a couple of projects that I called NOAAs, But there's been such a need for new construction because we have such a shortage that we probably haven't spent enough money just to preserve the housing we have. And we have the situation now in Winooski where a large number of families are going to lose their housing in a very tight housing market.
Yes, I think it might also, if it's okay with the chair, be informative to add that after the last session, the board developed a proposed allocation plan for the 144 million, and we put that out to the public and stakeholders in 2 public information sessions and solicited feedback on those various uses, how much for rental, how much for home ownership, mobile home communities, farm worker housing, recovery residences, and made adjustments based on that input.
And is all your projects, do they all have an affordability, perpetual affordability aspect to them, be they rental or home ownership? And is that by statute, or you just have, as a board, have decided to do that?
That's a statutory requirement for us with a couple of caveats, but in essence, almost anything that we've ever done is permanently affordable. We have funded for many years, as just an example, the home access program at the Vermont Center for Independent Living, and that doesn't come with permanently affordable covenants, but we're providing a very modest amount of money for, bathroom and kitchen modifications and ramps. And I think we've always made the legislature aware of it. This was a key priority of Chair Fox during her days in at the Appropriations Committee and the other body, and it's always been something we've told the legislature about, and that's probably the one thing that regularly has not had the permanent restrictions attached to it. But yes, that's fundamentally, when we were created and in statute, that's fundamentally our mission, is to take state investment and try to secure a permanent benefit so that people are not in the future displaced.
So I may be jumping ahead to your review of the bill a little bit, but we're obviously, as always, constrained by time, and there are some good sections in the bill that we're not going to be able to really do due diligence on. So take something like large employer housing, or conversion of commercial property to residential, those kinds of issues which are have been identified as areas that have some promise, but in this bill we're not going to be able to get to them. Would it be appropriate to, in your mind, to say to the Housing Conservation Board, as a statement of legislative intent, saying X amount of the money we give to you may be used to develop incentives to promote these ideas, and just flag the issue to you, not a mandate, but a legislative statement that we want you to look at that. So if somebody comes along and says, I've got a project where the developer just needs a little bit of grease to get over the top on converting a commercial space to residential, or some of the ideas are in the bill that we're not going to be able to get to. Just your thoughts on that.
We'd be happy to take on that challenge. We have converted most recently in Rutland, former John Deere dealership, into 9 permanently affordable apartments, transitional apartments, with the Rutland Housing Authority across from the high school. It was not inexpensive, but we have done that, and we're open to doing that. I'm going to be on the phone with somebody from Agrimark Cabot in about an hour, because they're having a shortage of employees, both for their Middlebury plant and at Cabot. They've got some land in Cabot that they're thinking about for housing, so we'll have that conversation. So we're happy to work with anybody in that context. We have not yet found, one of the reasons we've done the hotels to housing conversion is that, or the 2 reasons, is that it's been able to happen quickly and at a lower cost than new construction, but it hasn't been inexpensive it's much less expensive than new construction. But we have not found easy, quick conversions in lots of instances. And as you all know, new construction is very, very challenging right now for anybody.
Right. And so I'm just thinking that as opposed to a study or, a consultant coming back, how we can go after some of these areas we know exist, like, you hear about the Bennington situation at the hospital. They're trying to develop employee housing and stuff, and they just don't seem to be able to make it work. And instead of waiting a year without any mandate, just have some language in there that maybe up to a certain amount of money can be used if you can find a creative way. And at the same time, demonstrate to us when we come back next year what are the missing links to make the employer community do this, or the developing community on commercial property do this. It may just be money, it may be other things, but maybe have some demonstration work go on, not as a mandate, but just to maybe strike a chord with your board, say the legislature's interesting to see how this might work out or play out.
Yeah, so let me just add we're happy to do that. Let me just add one other thing. And Commissioner Hanford spoke to this yesterday. I spoke with him and worked on a concept paper. And part of the thinking came that I sent to you last night, because he told me that he finally decided it was time to talk about it. We were in Manchester about a month and a half ago, where the community owns a commercial property with a big parking lot, and they're interested in developing housing there. We were on a call with two different calls, one with the Middlebury Select Board chair, and then another with a number of players, including Middlebury College, who have land that they want to see developed as housing. They don't need it for the college's purposes anymore. So we would love to explore, and this goes to the concept paper that I sent you last night, how to help communities build smart growth neighborhoods. And the fundamental idea in that concept paper would be for the legislature to take infrastructure dollars that are going to, I assume, are coming from the infrastructure bill that's passed Congress, to VTrans and to A&R for roads and sidewalks and water and sewer, and make those funds available for those neighborhood developments, and take that cost off the backs of the developers as a way to help reduce what they've got to help finance. Because usually the developer is bearing all the cost of that expense, and it just adds greatly to what's already a very difficult building environment.
Well, maybe we can move these ideas along, help move them along by like having a section in this bill that talks about that idea, talks about conversion of commercial space, talks about large employers providing housing, and say the board is encouraged or authorized to spend up to do demonstration projects in these areas. And just, it's an expression of the will of the legislature that we want you to pay attention to this. If it comes out that all your money is obligated for other things that are more concrete, maybe you don't do it, but that might be a good soft step to approach to it. Because I think these ideas are sort of, in my mind, sort of low-hanging fruit, in the sense of at least there's a lot of interest in them. The marketplace may be encouraging these kinds of projects more than the rest of the marketplace, and it may need a little money, just like we're doing with Missing Middle, to try and put more money into those kinds of units. So, Senator Clarkson.
Thanks. Gus and Jen, I think that many of, particularly on the large employer, and to some degree, the commercial buildings being converted, if not all of them in part, maybe to residential units. I think sometimes large employers have the assets they could bring to the table, like with a resort, they could possibly bring land. they have a need, workforce housing. You have the resources and creativity to think and understanding of all the pieces that need to be put together. The planners, our regional planners need, bring things to the table. If you're willing to be the umbrella, I think this is what we're asking you, if you would be willing to be the umbrella for those moving some of those conversations forward, or at least providing the forum for those conversations and some of that work, that if we gave you directed money to that forum, that would you be willing to take those on in addition to all the other stuff you have on your platter? Because we're cognizant of the fact that you have taken on a huge amount with all this.
So I will say again, yes, we're willing to be the convener. I will want to talk more with Commissioner Hanford because I don't want to. He's got a great shop that's working with communities and doing planning. But if you ask us to take this on, then we'll staff for it, and we're already engaged in those conversations, as I said, with Middlebury, with Manchester. I've noticed in the newspapers that City of Barre is going to take $1 million from ARPA, and they want to do housing work. Montpelier's got a bond issue to buy a property that may have multiple uses that might include housing. So we're happy to be part of that conversation. Who ultimately takes the lead in implementing the ideas may be a different question, but happy to help facilitate the conversations.
Right. No, I heard you saying that. It's just people need to know to go to you, and not everybody does. So great.
Okay, let's move on to the bill itself.
Okay.
Hear your thoughts, your and Jen's thoughts on the latest draft bill.
I'm just going to very briefly say three things. One is the provisions around land use are a really important step in the right direction. They kind of hit our wheelhouse as a housing and conservation organization because you're encouraging density where it ought to happen, which means we'll have less pressures for sprawl growth. Second, we have supported the Building Great Neighborhoods work that Chris Cochran has led, and modernizing bylaws is very important. And third, we're in complete agreement with the work you want to do around mobile home communities. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Jen to walk you through several sections, and I think she'll have a couple of ideas to add to what's currently in your legislation.
Okay, thank you, Gus.
Good morning, Jen Holler from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And we're excited about the bill and would like to offer a few reflections, and then actually have one in one section, a proposed amendment, which will be familiar to you. So as Gus said, we're very supportive of the housing and permit reform sections, all of section 2. And I should note, I'm going to be speaking from draft 4.1. I believe that's the most current.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Section 2, the changes to the neighborhood development area program are terrific. We support those. The changing the density of 4 residential units in section 2B also helpful. We support that. In 2C, where it has to do with municipal permits expiring, very supportive of that. As your committee knows better than just about any other, it takes multiple sources and some time to put together a housing project, and sometimes a municipal permit can expire before all that falls into place, and a developer has to go back through that process again, which with no real benefit. So we're very supportive of that provision. The section that's 2D in the current draft that raises the cap on the number of PHPs, priority housing projects. Actually, it's the number of units in a priority housing projects. In small towns from 25 to 50, it raises that cap. We're also very supportive of that as a balanced approach. If you can find a location and it gets permitted and it makes sense for development, why not put as much housing there as possible, if that makes sense? So to illustrate that for a second, in the slideshow that Gus showed you, he One of the pictures was of a sketch for a proposed development in Putney, Vermont, and that is currently designed to have 24 units. And that's because the cap in that community is is less than 25 units for this, because of this priority housing project provision. If that cap were a little bit higher, they would have been able to put in a few more homes there, while still meeting the definition of priority housing project. There are a few people in that community who are opposed to creating housing in that spot. And the developer was concerned that if they did need to go through Act 250, that project could, one or two people in that community could hold that project up for a couple of years. So they kept it to 24 units purposely. It's kind of a shame. Maybe 25 to 30 units could go there in an appropriate way. Let's see. I will jump to, it looks like Section 5, the home buyer incentive. I think that's a great idea for first generation home buyers. We will really defer, and we support that. We'll defer to VHFA as to whether there needs to be any tweaks to the language or not.
Do you have any, when I saw that, I'd like to consolidate programs wherever possible.
Mm-hmm.
It sounded to me like there was definitely not total overlap, but a significant amount of overlap between first-time home buyer down payment assistance program and the first generation home buyer incentive program. They can be different, but and you're probably not the right person to ask, but I'm just wondering if they could be consolidated such that, perhaps give more money to VHFA for the existing program and say, give some priority status to first generation home buyers.
I could see that first generation home buyers might benefit from a deeper subsidy than what's provided for under the current program, because they may not have access to the family or generational resources or wealth. And then I can also see, it looks like this, what's currently in your bill is as a grant or an appropriation, and the existing down payment assistance program is funded through the sale of state affordable housing tax credits. So there are two different funding mechanisms there. There may be good reasons for that, but as you suggested, that's best a question for Maura or Seth.
Right. Mr. Chair, is your plan to have a discussion of priority housing after this, after Jen cruises through the bill?
No, if you have questions on the section she's talking about, we might as well deal with them now.
So, Jen, just to back up, I think some of us were a little shocked to learn, that priority housing actually has a time frame to it that I don't think some of us had appreciated, and a limit to the number of affordable housing, which is why this cap is important, and limits the number of actual affordable units in the project. So, when you talk about permanent affordability, priority housing, from what I've learned in our discussions with Senate Natural Resources, is that actually priority housing, it's not permanently affordable. It only lasts for X number of years. And that, so could you talk to us about that? Because we really greenlight so much with priority housing, and yet it actually doesn't get us any permanent affordability. At least from what we're beginning to sort of understand more fully.
I'd be happy to. So priority housing projects are a definition for the purpose of permitting. So under Act 250, what qualifies as development and what doesn't. So if you meet the definition of a priority housing project, which has certain levels of affordability and requires the affordability to last for 15 years, then you do not need to go through, and you're in certain areas of the state, you do not need to go through Act 250. So that's a benefit to developers. And it creates an incentive for developers to include some number of affordable housing units within their developments.
But only
But
20, I guess the concern is that it's been whittled down from 30 years of affordability down to 15. I mean, almost cut in half in 10 years. And that only 20% of the units be affordable. And then those evaporate after 15 years and it all goes to market rate.
So,
Well, so I think I can help with this question if I could go a little bit further.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, I didn't mean it that way, but
It's
So-
okay.
so that's for the purposes of the permitting. But what really drives the level of affordability in a project and how long it has to be affordable is the funding. So there are very few. So priority housing projects themselves, that definition does not drive what's going to be in a specific housing project. It basically says if you meet this criteria, you don't have to go through Act 250. But what's really going to drive what the mix of units and the mix of affordability in a development are going to be the grants, funding, the grants, the financing available, the local needs, what the market is, and all those other factors. So the benefit to the developer of that, basically, and I'm using terms that would horrify some people, I'm sure, but for time's sake, a pass on Act 250, that's a benefit to them, but maybe in the range of $30,000, $40,000 worth of value for a project. So for that, they agree to hold those units affordable for 15 years. But if you're going to get public financing and you're going to get grants and funds through VHCB, low-income housing tax credits, and others, then the state requires you for that more substantial public investment of actual money that you commit to permanent affordability. So the policy decision at the time that the current priority housing project definitions were set, were balancing those two things. What commitment do you get from the developer for what the benefit is that they receive? And it was a negotiated compromise. So I hope that helps.
That helps. I guess we might want to know how many of the priority housing projects you have worked on have actually ended up being permanently affordable and how many have transitioned into marketplace value. Into marketplace housing projects.
Well, I can't tell you how many priority housing projects may have reached the end of their affordability term and then transition to market rate because we don't have funding in them. But I can tell you that anything that we do have funding in that also happen to qualify as a priority housing project, that's still permanently affordable. Okay. I can also tell you of the approximately 15 projects that Evernorth or Housing Vermont has in their development pipeline right now. About a third of those, about 6 would qualify as priority housing projects, if that helps you with the scale.
It's all helping. So basically anything that has VHCB money in it is permanently affordable.
Yes, and we're applying that to the ARPA funds too. So, and that's a really important thing. And I'm going to go back to a point that Gus was making. So the property owner who's evicting people from Winooski also has properties around the state, including some properties he bought from another private developer that accessed federal home funds through VHCB. At the time that he accessed those, the original developer did, we gave him some home funds to help with that project and required permanent affordability. You're not seeing those properties in the news. Those properties cannot be flipped, and that's the contrast. So I think, so we are applying permanent affordability to the ARPA funds too. So those resources will be permanently affordable, the portions of the projects that receive that funding.
So I guess, sorry to keep pushing on this, but we're all trying to better understand what we're greenlighting and what we're not and what we're getting for it and what developers are getting for it. What percent of the priority housing projects that are built in this state are done with VHCB dollars? I guess then I would ask.
So I would have to get back to you with the exact details, but the Natural Resources Board recently provided information to the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee of the priority housing projects that they knew of. See, the thing is that you don't necessarily know the universe because it's something that doesn't fall under Act 250. So, but of the approximately 25 priority housing projects they were aware of, over the last 2 years, a third of them we had been had VHCB funding in them. And those, please don't quote me on those. That's just that's just to give you a sense of the scale.
Thank you.
Okay, shall I keep moving through the bill?
Yes, please. We're on manufactured, section 6, I think.
Yes, so VHCB provides feasibility funding, infrastructure funding, and funding for acquisition. There are a whole range of other needs associated to mobile home communities, and we support what Commissioner Hanford had suggested to you around a more detailed approach to what you've got in the bill here.
So let me just ask you a question on this, just to emphasize this. The $5 million that's suggested in this bill, that just came from the bill as introduced. I get the sense that this pretty uniform agreement about the amount of money to go into this program and how it would be divided into various parts. We have a memo that Josh sent to me last night. I don't know if it's posted yet, that breaks down the $5 million. But where does that $5 million come from? Is that ARPA funds that the governor has in his budget for FY23?
You have to defer to Commissioner Hanford on that.
Okay. But your understanding would go mostly to you to run your various aspects of helping mobile home parks and mobile home owners?
I don't believe that's the case. I believe the proposal is different than that. So we will continue to have funding that we could use for the pieces of the mobile home work that we do. And there's a different proposal for complementary programs, but maybe those are good questions for Commissioner Hanford later.
Okay. So I think
Section 7 of the bill is the large employer section. So we've talked about that already a little bit. I think one of the things I will note that some of our the regional housing nonprofit organizations, including Champlain Housing Trust, I mean, they are having conversations with employers, and so we would be able to report back to you around, what some of the barriers are. One of the things that comes to mind for us immediately is what category of workers are you really talking about? So large employers are going to be the ones who have the resources to be able to, do this, to have the matching grants. Is a small childcare worker, or childcare operation going to be able to provide? They're not going to be able to do the same thing for their workers. So what are the considerations around that?
Is it as simple as penciling this out, that there is a clear desire by these large employers to house some of their employees, and they're willing to put up some money, but they don't want to put up all of it? And to the extent VHCB or the state can add a sweetener, that may make those projects go with leveraging matching funds from the employer. Is that the heart of the problem, that the numbers don't work presently and they need some subsidy to make it happen?
Well, the other part of the problem is employers aren't excited about being developers and carrying that risk, I think, in a lot of instances.
But do you or Gus have any sense that there's a lot of complications in the details, I understand that, but are they interested in putting up some money?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
And or land.
Yeah. Okay.
So section 10 is about the TIFs, and we don't have specific comments that other than to say that we've seen municipalities be able to use the tool very effectively to bring housing to their communities.
Okay.
The municipal bylaw grants, that's where, oh boy, you might recall that when your committee was working on this last year in the context of S101, a VHCB and the Affordable Housing Coalition and others testified in support of some amendments to this that would basically braid affordability into this, so that as you're creating incentives for municipalities to update their bylaws and attract or drive more housing into the community centers and where it's appropriate in infill locations, that there's that there's a reminder and a requirement that they continue to think about allowing affordable housing as part of that mix. If we imagined a world in which all of our highest hopes are realized, and there's all kinds of new housing in appropriate places within existing community centers, and everybody wants to live there, what we really don't want to have happen is for the lower income folks to be driven out. So I've got some amendments. So this came up at a time where your committee was in feeling a great deal of urgency to get 101 out last year. You encouraged us to go to the House, and they did add it. And so I have an amendment. I can pop that language up really quickly if it's okay, or it's posted on your website. It essentially says in each instance in this section where it says creating more housing choice and availability, it adds affordability. So housing choice, affordability, and availability. And then in the list where it says the things a municipality must do to access one of these grants, it adds a number 6 that says they also have to show how they're meeting the elements, the housing element of their municipal plan around ensuring housing is provided for moderate and lower income households. So that's the substance of our amendment.
So let me ask you a question. This section is basically codifying a program that was already implemented with money in the Appropriations Act. And my understanding is that Chris Cochran put this program in place, and he primarily followed the Senate version, but there were 2 different versions on the wording in the House and the Senate that didn't get enacted, but they weren't very different. Do you know if the guidelines he put out for the grants that have been given already had the concept of affordability in it at all?
I don't know. The administration supported this language last year. I don't know if the current guidelines have it. It doesn't seem like it would be a heavy lift to add them if they don't.
Okay.
I remember this conversation. I thought we had added it, and I thank you for flagging this because I think that it would be important to add.
Okay. Well, we have your language. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Section 14, tax credits.
We're supportive of that section. So that's easy enough to say. We're supportive of the section around the wastewater connections. Although I will say that I haven't looked at this to see if this was what was passed last year, but we supported what was in 101 last year on both the House and Senate side. Well, it didn't get through the House, but should have.
Right.
I don't, before you jump to the water section, in this latest version, we have a 2-year pilot project on the expansion to NDAs.
Mm-hmm.
Credit. I think it's written, Ellen could correct us, but I think it's written that up to 20% of the $5 million or $1 million could go to NDA tax credits. Is that something you've looked at all, followed in the House, or have any opinion on expanding it to NDAs on a pilot basis?
We support the expansion. If doing a pilot is what it takes for it to advance, then maybe that's okay. But I do know that it's a fair amount of work to set up a program and then to dial it back. It's nice for developers to know what the resources are ahead of them and where those resources are going to be available. So I guess I would just offer those comments.
Well, one of the discussions, and I know I had this concern, was that while we welcome expansion of the downtown tax credit program, if we do it simultaneously with a expansion of the breadth of the program to NDAs, it could hurt the downtowns if we don't get enough money in the expansion, and you should have more people feeding at the trough. So, is there a concern there at all? I mean, this may not be the area of your expertise, but.
Well, what I can offer is that if it's the legislature's desire to do this, but they would still like the downtowns or the community centers to benefit from a greater share of that, you could put you could write that in, and I don't know what the administration would think about this, but VHCB statute says that we're to use a certain amount for housing, a certain amount to conservation. If we vary from that by a certain amount, then we are to report to the legislature why. And it creates kind of an expectation and a guideline for us. We've never reported back to you because we've never swung that far towards housing or conservation over time, but it gives us a very clear direction of legislative intent. So perhaps a mechanism like that could be considered.
Okay. And in this tax credit section, there's a new kind of tax credit, qualified flood mitigation projects. And I have a note to myself, how does this relate to housing at all? Should we be expanding this program in this committee to deal with flood mitigation? And can you somehow draw a line or a nexus to housing?
Well, we don't have a specific position on that particular question. It helps create safer housing. And maybe that if the legislature wants to do this, there's probably some value in doing it in the same place as these other changes to the same program. So I guess those would be the policy considerations.
Okay.
I'm not able to speak in more detail about what the benefit or how many homes might be helped or that sort of thing.
That's fine. And we have some other witnesses that might want to.
Yeah, it's really a Mr. Cochran question.
Okay. Wastewater connection permits. I'm sorry you started down that road, but I didn't.
Yeah, we support it as your committee passed it last year. It feels like there's pretty general agreement that there's an overlap in those processes that's unnecessary.
Okay. Okay. So we'll get to section 16, which is changing the definition of affordable housing. I assume you have some opinions on this.
Yeah, that gets our attention right away, as you can imagine. So we would register a concern around that. So changing the definition of affordable housing. First, there's the very kind of just sort of policy practical concern that over the years, the legislature has gradually, and with some advocacy on the part of the Affordable Housing Coalition and other, made the definitions of affordable housing in statute consistent across titles. So, and there's real value in that. And then there are other policy reasons for the affordability level being lower for rental housing than it is for home ownership, having to do with the amount of resources that are available. I think we would absolutely agree that there's tremendous demand and need for more housing, in that the 60 to 120 range. But priority housing project definition is probably not the place to try to address that. And another point I would make is that or ask you to consider is that 100, well, I should get my chart ready because I can know what the next question will be, but 120% affordable rental housing affordable at 120% of median in many places is going to be above what the market rate is. So you're not really driving a change there. So I guess I would leave it with that, and that could be a long conversation. But
what page are you on? I'm lost. I've forgotten where that definition.
Section 16. Section 16.
Oh,
yes.
Right. Okay. This is the proposed bill that had come from.
It's on page 35.
Right. Got it.
So,
so for example, for a 2-bedroom house,
right,
a rent that's affordable at 120% of the area median income would be $2,270 a month.
Sorry, how much to?
$2,270 a month. That's a 2-bedroom at 120%, and that's the statewide number. In Chittenden County, it'd be $2,590 a month. That's not very affordable for rentals.
So this is in the Act 250 section. So this changes the definition of affordable housing in terms of priority housing projects as to how many units have to be set aside for how long, and who can-
Right.
who
So
can
essentially,
qualify.
a developer would get that Act 250 passed by just building what the market
Okay.
is right now.
Okay.
I don't think that's the intent.
Okay. Anything else on section 16?
No, I'll just say I'd much rather come in and be able to support what Senator Brock is proposing, but I can't on that one.
I hear you.
So the development in counties with high need, I would think we would just need to understand that better. We're not quite sure how that would play out in areas like Stowe or Norwich or Woodstock. Or if I just haven't been able to hear enough testimony about how that would actually work. But it's a big policy change.
Right, and we've been told that it probably just would benefit developers and home renters in Burlington, in Chittenden County and Grand Isle County as it's written out in the numbers that we've seen. Yeah, that's subject for, I think, a larger conversation. What time is it? Let's see. We need to move on. So let's see if we can get through.
Sure, I can do that. Yeah. Sales and use tax exemption. So we would be supportive of that. So, and I think most, if not all, of the projects that we fund that qualify as priority housing projects are larger multifamily projects that also use MORAs, low-income housing tax credits, and they're structured as private limited partnerships, and they pay taxes. Construction costs are going up. This could help. It would help. So it helps actually what you would think of as the private and the nonprofit sector, because for these types of projects, they do it through a limited equity partnership. That's a private entity. So they pay the taxes.
So that they're not nonprofits, that are a lot of the development that you work with don't already have this benefit?
That's right. For that type of projects, if it's funding from us for something like a habitat home, they would have that benefit, but not for the tax credit deals. The VHCB funding is used with the tax credits.
Okay, we have JFO coming in on that section later this morning.
My concern is that this may be a fairly good sized tax exemption.
Yeah, I don't have a sense of what that impact would be. And we don't have any comment on the Act 250 appeals or the environmental court provisions. That's just not something that, we've examined or weighed in on. And the missing middle, Gus has already sort of spoken to, and I think that there are ongoing conversations around what that program should look like, and you'll hear more about that. We've tried to describe what our role is in that space, and you'll hear more conversations about that later this morning.
So there's a section 20 on ADUs.
Yeah, you just
Yes.
jumped over the ADUs.
That was really bad, wasn't it?
That was. We noticed.
Well, maybe you skipped over it on purpose because maybe you don't see much involvement of VHCB in the development of ADUs.
I think that's right. I would say that we really emphasize that we need housing of all types, especially in our community centers. And I can also say that it's been our very direct observation and what we've experienced in our own community, or I have experienced in my own community, that it works best when there's somebody to help people through the process. So,
right. Well, you're
I
lucky.
appreciate that this conversation is happening.
You live in a community that had a navigator for those, which was great. And so we're adding that because we thought that was a good model.
Okay. So
that's it.
I think we're probably a little bit behind schedule. I haven't checked the agenda, but I think we could use a break. It's now 10:25. Let's break till 10:35 and